Okay, audio is sharp, camera 1 rolling, camera 2 rolling.
Okay, multi-generational, intergenerational video 3.
Welcome to another session on intergenerational leadership. How do I create a healthy intergenerational work environment? In the first two sessions, we spoke briefly about disruptive change, this world that we're living in, what to expect, what are we experiencing, and then in the second session, we just talked about there's this new generation that's birthed, and are we ready for the generation? And kind of almost not really getting into who is this generation, but in this session specifically, we want to talk briefly just about who are these generations. And let me start by saying there's lots of theories out there as to who are the different generations, what makes these generations unique, and I don't think that's our goal to give our own definition.
Well, I don't still, am I Gen Xer or millennial or zennial or what am I?
Well, sometimes when you're really just sitting down doing nothing, you get this sense of giving that you're more a boomer, That's a perspective. And so, we really don't want to get into, give definition, because I think the problem with that I find often is that we categorize generations and say, you do this, or you're a boomer, or you're a millennial, but what we're creating through that is that we're creating this gap. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. Yes, we want to acknowledge that we're different, and we want to acknowledge that we're unique, but we don't want to do at the end of the day say, categorize everybody, put them in little boxes on a shelf, and create this gap between one another. Because I think this world that we live in is more intergenerational than it is about just knowing all these different generations. Now, you've done some study that I know around generations, and as we said, yes, generations are often communicated into certain age categories, but we don't work on that because generations are more defined by their behavior. So, from your research, and it might be different in other parts of the world, obviously, what are some of these characteristics that you pick up that are different between these generations?
So I think firstly, we need to go into what really defines a generation. And it's more or less what they were exposed to during their formative years. So, as you said, in different countries it could be different things. In South Africa, we as borderline Gen X, millennials or zennials, were exposed to a certain life. Other cultures were exposed to a different life. So you can't always say that all South Africans in this age group is this way, because we were exposed to different environmental occurrences, events that formed our thinking and formed our exposure. But what I think you can define is the exposure to technology and to social thinking. So I think the technology is a big factor that differentiates generations in the workplace these days. So you'll find that boomers they feel a little bit intimidated by technology. They feel a little bit intimidated by the youngsters who know more than them. So often you find your boomers are a little bit more aggressive, a bit more coercive in their leadership styles. They want people to do as they are told, people to work according to deadlines. We have to achieve this, A, B, C, so a bit of micromanagement going on there. Whereas Gen Xers are defined more or less as more autonomous. They find their identity in the fact that they can be self-sufficient. During the time that Gen Xers grew up, there was emancipation of women, and they would take jobs, and they came home to empty houses because mom was working. So they often go by latchkey kids. So they know how to make their own lunch, they know how to do their homework without mommy or daddy supervising them. So there's an autonomous independence around Gen X. That's kind of a global phenomenon. And then the millennials, on Gen X, they were kind of like digital technological immigrants. So we all had to learn how a cell phone worked. There was a time I didn't have a cell phone, and there was a time I had a cell phone. And then my cell phone evolved, so there was greater technology. So the generation grew as technology grew. So like I said earlier in one of the other videos, we created those tablets, we created that technology. And now we're looking at it and thinking, what have we created, you know? So there's a whole paradox actually within the Gen X generation. Then you have the millennials who were parented by the boomers. So you kind of skip a generation because every generation is about 20 years old. So the boomers were the parents of the millennials, and the Gen X's more or less are the parents of your, what do you call them now? Gen Zs, yes, that are coming into the workplace now. And then of course your alphas that are coming in. So, I mean, millennials are in the position where Gen X's were when technology came. Because I think millennials are also looking at Gen Zs and saying, oh my goodness, you know, I know my phone's important to me and it's an extension of who I am socially, but it doesn't consume my life. Like, it's part of who I am. Without my phone, I'm nobody.
Can I maybe ask a question? I'm a little bit oblivious to every definition of every generation, but what I see as someone looking into complexity and trying to figure out the patterns, it looks like there was this pendulum effect, you know, the one extreme to the other extreme. So I'm a helicopter parent, you know, I'm hovering over my child, I'm from playing outside and being free. Do you think there's something integrationally happening where we maybe reach a phase where we use the best of every generation and getting a new model of, you know, this didn't work. So it's not either or, it's both and more approach rather than one extreme to another extreme versus.
I think that's happening with every generation. Obviously, Gen Zs are now going through the phases, going into adulthood, and there are experiences that they have gone through, and ways that they have seen things happening before them that they agree with and they disagree with. So obviously when they step into parenthood, they're going to start treating their children or raising their children from that understanding what worked for them and what didn't work for them. So I think in every generation you have these pendulum things that I agreed with that and I disagreed with that, so I'm going to follow, create this middle way. And what's going to happen from that is there's obviously going to be certain consequences that will follow from that. The alpha generation will look at it and says, oh, we agree with this, but we disagree with that again, and they create their own pattern or their own way of doing things. I think what really stood out for me, kind of from what you said, you know, with the technology, is that the Gen X's, as an example, looked at technology and they had all these different accounts. They had a Facebook account, a WhatsApp account, and an email account. For them, it was more about these different accounts that I had that helped me in my daily life and my daily work. When the millennials come in, still do. Then you have the millennials coming in, they're like, oh, wait a minute, it is not really just about having these different accounts, but as you said, it becomes an extension of who they are. And they started to illustrate who they are through these different accounts that they were playing with. And what we're seeing with the millennials, and it's still early stages, but what we're seeing with the millennials is almost like it becomes a replacement of who they are. So what I illustrate or communicate through Facebook or WhatsApp or Snapchat or TikTok, it's not really my real life and my real experiences as in who I am, but what I would like other people to think. So it becomes a replacement. So that's just a technology thing. But what summarizes for me is that every generation uses these different technologies and these different experiences to benefit the most out of it. But what's critical is that we dare not come to a place where we start categorizing them. So, well, this is the generation and that's what that generation is. I think we touched on it earlier on too. But what I would like to talk about a little bit is that this difference between generational traits and youthful traits. Often I think we confuse this too, because especially with Gen Zs, there are still majority of Gen Zs are in their teenage years. And there are certain behaviors that are taking place as teenagers. And if we really look at those of the teenagers today, they're not much different from when we were teenagers. There's a lot of similarities in the way we did things and behaved when we were teenagers. And we refer to that as youthful traits. And we need to be careful that when we look at generations that we don't confuse us too.
While you're asking that question, it also seems to me like in hindsight, it's, we have the luxury of looking back, say, well, this is the way boomers lived and, and the silent generation and so on. So there's almost this stable element, which is everyone's going to go through their teen years and this is what's going to happen. But there's a mystery in the generational trait of what's going to happen. We don't really know. But we know generation at the youthful trait, that's almost a given.
So there's a big question I ponder a lot, and that is, so if you look at generations through the ages, the elders always impart the wisdom. They impart the experiences, life experiences, and how things should be. And I think what technology has done, because we've got access to Google and search engines and information at our fingertips, young ones, babies just be born, can just find that information at the drop of a hat. But that experience, that elderly wisdom, is what's not really being transferred. And my question is if, and maybe I'm stereotyping here, but if boomers and even Gen Xers, when we look at that kind of video that you discussed in the previous video, feel intimidated by all this knowledge and these tech-savvy or tech-integrated youth, then we almost feel like, what is there to teach you? What humanity can I bring to you? What values and morals and humanity can I bring to the rearing of the next generation? And my question is, what is the appetite of that generation? And the study that I did kind of allude to that. So what type of leaders are our youngsters looking for? What do they want? And it comes down to basic needs of being human. We all want to belong somewhere. We all want to feel like we're recognized and regarded as a human being. We want to grow and develop. We want to be part of a community. We want to feel like we're grounded in something that has meaning. We want to go somewhere. We want to buy into a vision. We want to embrace the future with confidence because we're grounded in who we are. Those are basic human functionalities, at the end of the day. And that's what I think brings us together across the generations.
If I can respond to your question, I think this Gen Zs coming through are more like a hacking generation. So the fathers, the mothers, the mentors, the leaders, the coaches is becoming more and more important because there's too much out there.
Yeah.
So yes, I have access to the world's information, but how do I filter that and decode it? So to have decoders in our community, let's say the coach or the father or the mother is the decoder of how this information filters through to this community, and that's a hack. Because I've just worked through 20 years of experience. So I think our leaders should understand more their role as decoding the last 100 years for the next 100 years towards my mentee or my child and the youth of today, helping them integrating this, which is a very important role.
Yeah. It's almost like categorizing all of that data and information into what it means to be human, what it means to survive as a youngster in a developing world,
What I like about this is that maybe we should coin a new word and take the Gen Zs away and call it the hacking generation. So you got it there.
From ancient times, we look at leadership studies, there's a word called a seasoned leader. When they appointed a leader, they called it him or her a seasoned leader. So once you've been through a few seasons, then you were appointed as a leader. And I think we should look at those seasoned leaders out there and connect them with these mentees as helping them to hack this humane, progressive life that we're moving towards.
So just to summarize, and I think coming to the end of this session, and I think there's so much more that we can talk about, but to just summarize, at the end of the day, yes, there are different generations, and we've given categories and names to all of these generations, and I think that there's value in it too, because it helps you as the individual to focus maybe a little bit more. But what we should be very careful about at the end of the day is to categorizing to such an extent that we start putting them into shelves or into different boxes, and we don't see the link, the value of being human that actually connects between these generations. And every generation's got specific needs, and what we can do is identify those similarities and those needs that every generation has expressed, and from a leadership point of view to say, how do I bring these things together? How do I identify what are these similarities that these generations are expressing through their needs, and help them to find that going through. And then lastly, obviously, is realizing the difference between youthful traits and generational traits, that we don't get mixed up between those two. Otherwise, we're going to ask ourselves a lot of questions, and we're going to spend time in studying the wrong area. So that brings us to the end of this session, and in the next session we will talk a little bit about more, how is this generation being created, almost a way, a definition of an understanding how a generation is defined.
Good.